Do we have someone who can run?
Yeah.
Mike's fantastic. Thank you. So what we'll do is I'll take the moderator's prerogative and just throw a question to the panel, and then we might ask some questions both about the ideas that have been raised, but also if you have really sort of practical questions about particularly what Dan was talking about, how to protect your privacy, and what you personally can do, it would be worth raising them now for the benefit of everybody else. And of course, you know, I'm sure Dan will be around for a little while. He can talk about that too. But I wanted briefly to get some of the thoughts from the panel on what Dan just touched on at the end there. We're talking about ways that we can avoid the state, but of course, many of these technological changes have given new ways that the state can impose itself on our lives. I'd like some reflections on the countervailing pressure between how technology has allowed them to be more coercive and we may have, as well as us, to protect them from coercion.
Well, one point here is actually that even if you take precautions to protect yourself from a privacy point of view, the fact that we have all these social networking set up and allows the state to know who are your friends, who are other libertarians who have similar to you. So, and that's another thing that is coming up now, especially with Facebook privacy, is you might not be on Facebook, but your family and your friends might be, and they'll have pictures of you. And those pictures will show you were here at this time. So there's a difficulty there, even if you are very privacy conscious.
In a similar vein, there was Facebook rolled out a thing called Graph Search, probably about, I think it was 2013, that allowed you to do really complex combinational searches. It was enabling to run and allowed you to choose to search by sexual orientation, which, as you can imagine, wasn't great. They switched it off after about 8 hours, but that led to a series of investigations by the Iranian police. This is the problem with a lot of these this is a really cool technological solution. I can find people who went to my university who are interested in things that I'm interested in, and I can do filter by these kind of things. The problem is that they didn't view the data in different kind of contexts. They're like, oh, all this data is collected in the same way, so it all obviously has the same value, which isn't the case. Some can be benign, some can be, in some cases, quite deadly. And so the problem is that a lot of people that build these tools don't necessarily think about the nuances of the implementations. And they don't think about the potential applications because they don't exist in the scope where those can exist. If you're working with Memo Code, you don't think about the impact of being able to search by sexual orientation in Tehran. It just would never ever occur to you. Obviously now they have people that are there to help protect these kind of things from prevent them from happening again. But it's the same problem, is that we can also be let down by the benignity of these kind of institutions. If someone thinks that, oh, you know, it's searching is a really cool idea, and that's great, it's a really cool tool, but it always depends on the context in which you use it. And it's like, and if people aren't aware of the potential downsides of the tools they're using, there can be serious consequences.
We might toss it to the floor. So, gentlemen, just here.
Quick one. I always find that in discussions about privacy is a broader thing than personal data. I always think there's a little bit of confusion between situations where someone voluntarily provides their personal data to a technology company, and then situations where the state and either forces that technology company to grab the data, or the state itself uses the technology to pry on you. So I think it's more consistent to think about us not being, in a way, being friends of the Facebooks and the Googles, not putting pressure on those guys. I mean, if you want to use it, use it. If you don't, don't. But we don't want the state to get data. We don't care about people voluntarily giving their data to other people.
Well, that's one of the big problems that's happened in the EU, is because the EU confuses all kinds of power as being equivalent. They see the equivalent of the US government doing this as Google doing, mining data to be able to sell people better products. They view the two as morally equivalent, when obviously that's not the case, because in one instance it's used to sell people products, in the other it's used to kill people. I don't know about you, I tend to think of those two as being quite morally different. But this is the problem. This is the argument we're going to get into time and time again. What is the difference between the government doing this and Google doing this? And the answer is really simple. You can opt out of Google. Opting out of the government takes a lot of time. And if it's the US government, you really can't. If you're on the planet hell, if you're on the moon, they can still touch you. So
Look, I'm going to interject a bit here because I've done some work on this. Privacy is about control over your own information. Now, in the corporate world, we are still figuring out new norms about how to relate, and there are firms that have had, that have wrongly used data, and they are violations of what we would consider to be an implicit contract about the use of that. And I think that the market is actually working out what those norms are going to be, and that is a constant evolutionary question that a lot of governments would like to regulate for us. But you're absolutely right. It's that complete lack of control when the government uses its own surveillance power that is the serious problem, and that is much more significant than any of the sort of corporate entity privacy relationships we have. I see the Senator would like a chance, and we can't not give the Senator a chance to answer questions.
Thank you for the kind words, Dan. I did fight hard on that metadata issue, and I was there when your words or your recommendations were read out by Scott Ludlam in the third reading speech. I just wonder if you might like to give us some practical advice on how to deal with the metadata and retain a degree of anonymity. I've got Wicker on my phone, but not many people are using it. Is that the best messaging service? You can use a VPN for your computer, and so that allows you to be very Norwegian, as you say. But how do you anonymise your phone if you're so inclined to anonymise your phone? How do you avoid the metadata which the police and security agencies, and I've heard it from the AFP and AGO myself, that's the stuff they really want to know where you are. How do you do that if you don't want to be found?
Well, as I said, the easiest way to do this is carry.
Dan, I should get you just.
Oh,
we've got a mic.
Cool. The easiest way to do this, as I said, is just not to carry a device. It's unfortunate that it's just the kind of the scenario that was living. But there's two. The important thing to differentiate is on mobiles in particular is the GSM data, like the data of the cell you're connected to, so that they know that you were at this particular cell, and the data that travels through it. So one of the things that I know these days Yo has been doing is they use a technology known as blackfin, which is basically fake GSM cells. The Baltimore police use them to track down drug dealers. They use them here. Your device will connect to it, but it won't initiate an encrypted GSM connection. So they can pull the audio, basically wiretap it, without actually having to tap the individual call. So without getting, I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this wiretapping solution. If you ever get like weird bubbling or static on the phone, you get a really long echo. That's the system they use to basically farm data out of and record a lot of phone conversations that happen. If you've ever had that, that's congratulations, you're getting tapped. But that's because that system is off, because they've got to basically break encryption, so they've got to go around it. With one of the blackfin systems, your device says, oh cool, it's a cell, but it doesn't have this feature and this encryption. I'll just fall back to the old standard. That data, unfortunately, there's no way you can get around it without not carrying a device. But in terms of the connections and the communications that you make, you can protect them. So with iMessage, for example, or with Wicker, or with Telegram would be the one that I'd recommend for cross-platform stuff. They will just see your device connected to Telegram servers, or those kind of things. Or if you have a VPN on your device, again, you're just having a great time in Norway. That kind of information you can protect, but unfortunately the location information, I can't think of any way to do it other than, as I said, getting access to a mobile phone that isn't registered to you.
Next question, please.
The question was to Darcy, it's about Uber.
Yes.
It's the fact that they're using a political tactic as part of their whole business plan. Is there any data or indication? Is there any data with regards to Uber that might indicate that if, let's say, the government decided, or the state government decided to legislate Uber out of existence, how many votes that would cost them? Is there any sort of analysis in that regard?
The shorter answer is no, but we don't tend to. You can't actually count votes. Oh, sorry. You obviously can't actually count votes on something as specific as that, but just the fact that Uber sends out emails to say, email your local MP, and they send it coming up to elections, and they did it with the New South Wales election. They're making this into a political issue on purpose, and you can never tell whether people are actually going to vote in that way or not. But it comes back to one of the things that Stephan was saying. This is about talking to people and getting people on side with liberty when they don't actually understand that they're actually fighting for free markets. So this is what Uber's doing. It's making it into a political issue, but all of the rhetoric around it is, hey, you shouldn't be able to, the government should be able to take this away from you. It's faster and cheaper and better. So the short answer is no, we can't actually count the vote.
I might toss in my own question, because one of the things I've been struck by doing technology policy for a little bit has been the incredible ignorance of the political class about the specific the specifics of the legislation that they've proposed. So in the case of data retention, we're talking about some of the most complicated areas of public policy. In fact, two of them: technology, which is really, really hard, especially for the elderly politicians that we have, and of course surveillance policy, like telecommunications intercept policy, is incredibly complicated. I wouldn't mind if I could ask the panel to reflect on, do the political class actually understand the laws that they're imposing? It's a hard question, I know.
This is the interesting thing, which is that the current Prime Minister of Singapore was on the record saying that he wrote the Sudoku solver in C++. So we probably can expect more from our politicians if we didn't just have this class of people that are groomed, that basically don't do anything.
So this is the exception.
My apologies. The Labour Liberal classes, effectively, that are, at least for the most part, the Liberals, none of the Labour, are basically student politicians, then staffers, then politicians, then I assume they die. Also, they go work for the Quarry Bank, and then they die. This is the other thing. It's weird. There's this one field where ignorance is also so touted. It's like, oh, I'm not confounded or tainted by this technology. I'm an idiot. I can't even use a pen. Like, as if it's kind of a sign that you're intelligent. It's not. You're a fucking moron. And you should honestly just piss off.
I had that yesterday from the chair. I did a Senate inquiry into copyright, and the chair of the inquiry literally said, "I know nothing about technology and copyright." So instead of discussing the legislation, you're sort of like, so what is copyright? What does copyright mean? Would copyright cover this? Would copyright cover that? Instead of talking about the fact that the government wants to censor websites that censor the Pirate Bay specifically. Anybody else want to comment on that? Or?
I think one thing I want to point out here as well is the question of authority. Really, it's saying, I think as libertarians we have to try and help reframe it, and rather than like this idea of the government should just by default have access to everything at once, we should say no. Actually, the government should theoretically serve us, not the other way around, and therefore we need to reframe it and say no. Like you have to justify why you need this access to take our privacy rights.
Questions?
Leave the microphone.
I'd like to ask the panel to comment on one of your phrases, Darcy, that was that we need non-prescriptive rules. So could you enlarge on what you determine as non-prescriptive rules, and particularly perhaps from another session where they commented on we need decriminalisation, not legislation. So could you marry those two concepts, please?
Sure, that's a very good question. I was talking about this in the sense of creating a spectrum, just to understand that at one end we have very prescriptive rules, and at the other end we have fewer rules that are less prescriptive. What I mean by prescriptive largely is rules that affect a specific technology or industry or group of people or any specific group. Because the problem is that the way that we see innovation occur and the way that it plays out is that it normally happens on the boundaries of two industries or on the boundaries of two different technologies. And the problem is the government coming in and making rules that are very prescriptive about what you can use a particular thing for. We should keep it open so that these boundaries are allowed to clash, and they do it in a faster way, and it lets the market sort out the problems on after the fact through the courts. So it's non-prescriptive rules obviously doesn't make a whole lot of sense. What I'm talking about is a strong rule of law, a broad set of rules that go across the entire population, because it's very hard to make rules. We don't know what the technology's for now as much as the government doesn't know. And that's just a really important thing to remember, that we don't know what it's for now either. And we need to make rules that allow for that change through time.
One of the problems that we have is these boundary problems. So what is a taxi? Or what is a bank? And what we need is sort of neutral, technologically neutral or competitively neutral laws.
Another thing that this, sorry, I'll just continue. Another thing with this as well is we're seeing a lot of problems with occupational licensing come up at the moment. So we've created all these or zoning laws, planning laws as well. We're seeing these problems where the government's come in and it's created some rules that were fine at that particular static point in time. But they don't deal particularly well when it was always assumed that a car would be a private part of private property that wasn't used for commercial property, for instance. When those lines are blurred, the whole system just starts to fall down. And the point was that those rules were there in the first place. So I'm going for non-industry specific, non-technological neutral sort of rules is what I'm talking about.
I think, just sort of tying back to that as well, I remember one of the Bitcoin speakers I was listening to gave an analogy here of saying, well, okay, at the time then, when people were going from horse and carriage and going to cars, what if you still had this rule that, every time before the car comes through an area, you've got to have someone come through and like ring a bell or whatever. Like these ideas of the rules that were in place for a previous technology just might not even be relevant at all with the new technology. And that's why, coming back to what Darcy was saying, we want to allow for permissionless innovation. We want to have rules that allow for innovation, that you don't have to stop and ask the state if you have permission to do this.
Because the way to go through the state and change those rules is obviously a lot slower and more expensive than if you allow it to occur from the bottom up. If those rules were never prescribed, it's a lot slower to change it through the state process.
Isn't that the same kind of point that Henry Ford said?
Hey, talking to that.
That Henry Ford said, if people ask me what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Like this is the kind of problem that we have. So I think maybe top down just will never work because who knew like 10 years ago that you would have had a smartphone in your pocket that was powerful as more. Like, what can you do with that? It's crazy. Imagine what we'll do in 5 years. The government doesn't know that. They don't really have that many people working for them, apart from I guess the area of reducing our privacy and our freedoms.
We might take one more question, probably down from the back end that way, if anybody's got something.
Just shout it out.
Yep, in the middle.
G'day guys. Now you're talking about privacy and technologies which we can use so far. Is there anything you see positive on the horizon with new technologies which improve the privacy and separation of the individual from government? For example, the mesh networks.
Yeah, that was actually one thing that I had cut from what I was going to talk about, because I wanted to talk about, so I don't know how many of you saw the protests in Hong Kong, but one of the ways they were communicating was the government had shut down a lot of the cellular network with little peer-to-peer Bluetooth networks. So every single device that you have has, well, I guess most of the modern ones have Bluetooth built into them, but it's Bluetooth low energy, so it doesn't use anywhere as much power as it used to, and you can use them to basically build these networks that emerge from nowhere, people that are together, like we could have a specific app for this conference that everyone joins a chat room that only works when you're within the proximity of this area, because you're peering the information through everyone else. I think mesh networks is a really, really interesting one. The problem we have is that we can have them emerge and create for specific purposes, but we need infrastructure of the future that allows us to get around government surveillance. The problem is that infrastructure has to be located in a physical place. So mechanisms that we can use to avoid the kind of scrutiny or even avoid the access to information is this kind of the encryption that works whereby the people don't know what the information is in transit. So it's kind of like secure held encryption. It's the same system that works for your data that's held on remote servers. Like if you've got an Apple ID and you encrypt your device, Apple can't unencrypt that on the server because you are the one putting the key to encrypt it, and it's not, there's no master key that exists that they can rip that data out of. I think this is the way that we'll be going, which is that there's going to be these safe harbor provisions that will have to be extended to organisations that say we can't access our users' data, and it's a product of the way that we actually build these products, and it's a selling point. If you were going to one of these different companies and they once said, oh, we're not going to encrypt the data because it'll take time, it'll be too stupid, but the product's free, and you go to another company and they say, look, it's $15 a month, but we can't see what you're doing with it. Also, we don't care, it's not our business. I think that's the way that it's going to go. Technology, as I said, has two sides to it. But you now have, again, you have some of the brightest mathematicians, thinkers, creators and inventors on the planet versus, the government. So these people are pissed off. They're really pissed off. The NSA was paying people to break into their servers and steal their data. You're going to get pissed off if someone breaks into your house and nicks your stuff and then tells you it's legal.
The former communications minister, Stephan, who I know you're all big fans of, used to complain about these internet libertarians who didn't think there should be any laws on the internet. Well, he would have hated this. I'd like to thank Dan, Stephan, and Darcy. I think that was marvellous. And they've given us some very good ideas about how we can get around internet regulation and economic regulation through technology. So thank you.
Thank you all. And please also join me. Chris is backed up from giving a talk in the other session and then coming over here and emceeing this. So please also thank Chris Berg.